Eternal Echoes presents Lavinia, a work by George Sand. Before talking about Lavinia, it is essential to mention its author, or rather, its creator. George Sand is the name behind which another identity is hidden. George Sand was a pseudonym, a necessary subterfuge for a female writer to have her work recognized for its literary quality rather than for other considerations. In reality, her name was Aurore Lucille Dupin de Dudevant, a woman who, 2 centuries ago, was ahead of her time and who, if she lived today, would surely continue to surprise us. She was born in Paris on July 1, 1804, and married at just 18, something quite normal for the time. Through marriage, she obtained the title of Baroness. She had 2 children, but those years were far from happy. In 1831, after 9 years of marriage, she left her husband and the estate where they lived, taking her 2 children with her and settling in Paris. A few years later, she legally separated, gaining custody of her children. It was during this time that she became known for defying French society by wearing men's clothing. A police order from 1800 required women to obtain a permit to wear what was considered men's attire. Some women requested it for health, occupational, or recreational reasons, such as horseback riding. But many others simply chose to wear pants and traditional men's clothing in public without permission. They did so for practical reasons, but also to challenge prevailing stereotypes. Sand was one of those women who wore men's clothing without a permit, something she did throughout her life. Besides feeling comfortable, this attire allowed her greater freedom to move around Paris and gave her access to places that would otherwise have been off-limits. She is said to have had numerous lovers, including composer Frédéric Chopin, with whom she spent time on the island of Majorca, Spain. She smoked in public, scandalous behavior for a woman at the time. She was an influential and successful writer, financially independent, and dressed as she pleased. With such traits, it was inevitable that she would become an icon, one that still endures today. On July 8, 1876, both George Sand and Aurore Lucille Dupin passed away, leaving behind an extensive literary legacy of novels, plays, and short stories, among which Lavinia stands out. Lavinia is the protagonist of this delightful short novel, characteristic of French Romanticism. She is likely the woman the author would have liked to be: beautiful, elegant, intelligent, independent, and cold. Cunning and strategic, Lavinia arranges a meeting with a former suitor she has not seen in 10 years, the outcome of which we must not reveal. Sand's storytelling captivates the reader, leading them on horseback to the awaited encounter with subtle humor and masterful prose. It will not take us long to figure out who wears the pants in this story. Fasten your seatbelts, a whirlwind is about to take the stage. Lavinia. An ancient letter. Since you are getting married, Lionel, wouldn't it be appropriate for us to return each other's letters and portraits? It is easy, since chance has brought us close again, and after 10 years spent under different skies, we are now only a few leagues apart. I have heard that you sometimes go to Saint-Sauveur. For my part, I will only be there for 8 days. I hope, then, that you will be there during the week with the package I am requesting. I am staying at the Estabinet house, at the foot of the waterfall. You can send someone with this message. That person will bring back a similar package, which I have ready to give you in exchange. Reply: Madam, the package you have ordered me to send you is here, sealed and bearing your inscription. I must, no doubt, be grateful that you did not doubt it was in my possession at the moment and place of your choosing to claim it. But must I then, madam, go myself to Saint-Sauveur to deliver it, only to entrust it to another person who will return it to you? Since you do not deem it appropriate to grant me the happiness of seeing you, Would it not be simpler to avoid the place where you reside and the emotion of being so close to you? Would it not be better for me to entrust the package to a reliable messenger to carry it from Bagnères to Saint-Sauveur? I await your instructions on this matter. Whatever they may be, madam, I will comply without hesitation. Letter. I knew, Lionel, that my letters were in your hands at this moment by chance because Henry, my cousin, told me he had seen you in Bagnères and obtained this information from you. I am glad that Henry, though somewhat of a liar like all chatterboxes, has not deceived me this time. I asked you to take the package yourself to Saint-Sauveur because messages of this kind should not be lightly exposed in mountains infested with smugglers who seize everything they find. As I know you are a man who would bravely defend a trust, I can be no more at ease than by entrusting you personally with what matters to me. I did not propose a meeting because I feared making the already arduous task I was asking of you even more unpleasant. But since you seem to perceive this meeting as a burden, I owe you and grant you, with all my heart, this small compensation. In that case, since I do not want you to waste valuable time waiting for me, I will set the day so that you do not find me absent. Be in Saint-Sauveur on the 15th, at 9 o'clock in the evening. Go to my house and inform my maid. I will return immediately. The package will be ready. Farewell. Sir Lionel was unpleasantly surprised by the arrival of the second note. It caught him off guard in the middle of planning a trip to Luchon, during which the beautiful Miss Ellis, his fiancée, counted on his company. The trip promised to be delightful. At the thermal baths, amusements almost always succeed because they follow one another so quickly that there is no time to organize them. Life there is spontaneous, vibrant, and full of surprises, and the constant arrival of new companions gives an impromptu air even to the smallest details of a party. Sir Lionel was enjoying himself in the Pyrenees as much as is appropriate for a proper Englishman. Moreover, he was quite enamored with Miss Ellis's imposing elegance and considerable dowry, and his absence at such a crucial moment as an important horseback ride. Miss Ellis had ordered a magnificent dappled gray horse from Tarbes, which she planned to showcase at the head of the caravan, could be fatal to his matrimonial plans. However, Sir Lionel's situation was complicated. He was a man of honor and great delicacy. He decided to turn to his friend Sir Henry to share this moral dilemma, but to compel the jovial Henry to take him seriously, he began by reproaching him. "Carefree chatterbox that you are," he exclaimed upon entering. "It was truly worth it for you to tell your cousin that her letters were in my hands. You have never been capable of keeping a confidential word. You are like an overflowing stream, one of those open vessels that adorn statues of nymphs and rivers. The water passing through them does not stop for even an instant." "Well done, Lionel," the young man exclaimed. "I like seeing you in a fit of anger. It makes you poetic. In these moments, you yourself are a torrent of metaphors, a river of eloquence, a spring of allegories." "Ah, of course, you find it amusing," Lionel exclaimed, furious. "We are not going to Luchon." "We are not going." "Who said that?" "We are not going, neither you nor I. I am telling you. Speak for yourself as much as you want. As for me, I declare myself your humble servant. I am not going, and therefore neither are you. Henry, you made a mistake, and you must fix it. You have caused me a great inconvenience. Your conscience demands that you help me endure it. You will have dinner with me in Saint-Sauveur." "May the devil take me if I do," Henry exclaimed. "I have been madly in love since last night with the little girl from Bordeaux whom I mocked so much yesterday morning. I want to go to Luchon because she will be there. She will ride my Yorkshire horse and make your great Aquitanian Margaret Ellis die of jealousy." "Listen, Henry," said Lionel with a serious air. "Are you my friend?" "Of course, that is well known. Now is not the time to get sentimental about friendship. I foresee that this solemn prelude aims to impose something on me. Listen to me. I tell you, Henry, you are my friend. You celebrate the happy events of my life, and I suppose you would not easily forgive yourself for causing me harm, a real misfortune. No, upon my honor. But what is this about? Well, Henry, you may be ruining my marriage. Come now, what nonsense! Because I told my cousin that you had her letters and that she is requesting them back. What influence could Lady Lavinia have on your life after 10 years of mutual forgetfulness? Do you have the vanity to believe she has not gotten over your unfaithfulness? Come now, Lionel, that is too much remorse. The harm is not so great, and believe me, it can be remedied. As he spoke, Henry carelessly adjusted his tie and glanced at the mirror, two gestures that, in the unspoken language of pantomime, are easy to interpret. This lesson in humility, coming from a man more presumptuous than himself, irritated Sir Lionel. "I will make no remarks about Lady Lavinia," he replied, trying to contain his bitterness. "Never will a feeling of wounded vanity lead me to tarnish the reputation of a woman, even if I never felt love for her." "That is exactly my case," Sir Henry replied imprudently. "I never loved her, nor was I ever jealous of those who received better treatment from her than I did. Moreover, I have nothing to say against the virtue of my illustrious cousin Lavinia. I never seriously tried to cast doubt upon it." "Did you do her that favor, Henry? She must be very grateful to you." "Come now, Lionel. What are we talking about, and what have you come to tell me? Yesterday you seemed indifferent to the memory of your first love. You were completely devoted to the radiant Ellis. Today, where do you stand? Please clarify it for me. You seem not to reason about the past, and then you say you will go to Saint-Sauveur instead of Luchon. Come on, who do you love here? Who will you marry?" "I will marry Miss Margaret, if God and you allow it." "Me?" "Yes, you can save me. First, read the new note your cousin wrote me. Have you read it? Very well. Now you see that I must decide between Luchon and Saint-Sauveur, between a woman to conquer and a woman to console." "Stop right there, you impertinent man," exclaimed Henry. "I've told you 100 times that my cousin is as fresh as flowers, as beautiful as angels, as lively as a bird, cheerful, rosy, elegant, and flirtatious. If that woman is desolate, then I consent to lament my entire life under the weight of such sorrow. Don't try to provoke me, Henry. I'm delighted to hear what you say. But in that case, can you explain to me the strange notion that leads Lady Lavinia to impose a meeting on me?" "Oh, you foolish companion!" exclaimed Henry. "Don't you see that it's your own fault? Lavinia had no desire whatsoever for that meeting. I'm sure of it, because when I spoke to her about you, when I asked if her heart ever skipped a beat on the road from Saint-Sauveur to Bagnères, upon approaching a group of riders among whom you might be, she answered with an indifferent air, 'Really? Perhaps my heart would beat if I happened to meet him.' And the last word of her sentence was deliciously modulated by a yawn. Yes, don't bite your lip, Lionel. It was one of those charming feminine yawns. So small, so fresh, so harmonious that they seem polite and affectionate. So long and drawn out that they express the deepest apathy and the most cordial indifference. But you, instead of taking advantage of this good disposition, couldn't resist the temptation to make speeches. Faithful to the eternal pathos of unfortunate lovers, though delighted to be so, you adopted an elegiac tone, a lamenting style. You seemed to weep over the impossibility of seeing her, instead of simply saying with sincerity that you were the most grateful man in the world for it. Such recklessness is impossible. How could I have foreseen that she would take seriously a few trivial words dictated by the courtesy of the situation? Oh, I know Lavinia. This is one of her typical mischiefs, eternal feminine mischief. But no, Lavinia was the sweetest and least mocking of all. I'm sure she has no more interest in this meeting than I do. Look, dear Henry, save us both from this torment. Take the package, go to Saint-Sauveur, handle everything, make her understand that I must not abandon Miss Ellis on the eve of your wedding, right? What a reason to give to a rival. Impossible, my dear. You made the mistake, and now you must face it. When one has the foolishness to keep a woman's portrait and letters for 10 years, when one has the imprudence to boast about it to a chatterbox like me, when one feels compelled to write with wit and emotion in a breakup letter, one must accept all the consequences. You have no right to refuse Lady Lavinia anything as long as her letters remain in your hands. And whatever means of communication she imposes, you are bound to it until you complete this solemn duty. Come, Lionel, have your horse saddled and let's set off, because I will accompany you. I bear some guilt in all this, and you see that I am no longer laughing when it comes to setting things right. Come. Lionel had hoped Henry would find another way to get him out of trouble. He remained distraught, motionless, bound to the spot by a secret feeling of involuntary resistance to the dictates of necessity. However, he finally rose, sad, resigned, his arms crossed over his chest. Sir Lionel was, in matters of love, a consummate hero. If his heart had been unfaithful to more than one passion, his external behavior had never strayed from the code of conduct. No woman had ever had reason to reproach him for an act contrary to that delicate and generous condescension that is the best sign of devotion a gentleman can offer to an offended woman. It was with the awareness of absolute fidelity to these rules that the handsome Sir Lionel forgave himself for the pains associated with his triumphs. "I have an idea," Henry finally exclaimed, also standing up. "It is the circle of our charming compatriots that decides everything here. Miss Ellis and her sister Anna are the most influential figures in the Council of Amazons. We must get Margaret to delay this trip, scheduled for tomorrow, by 1 day. 1 day here is a lot, I know, but in the end we must achieve it. Come up with a serious impediment and leave tonight for Saint-Sauveur. We will arrive in the afternoon, rest until nightfall. At 9 during the meeting, I will have our horses saddled, and at 10, I imagine it will take no more than an hour to exchange 2 packages of letters. We will mount again, gallop all night, arrive here at dawn, find the beautiful Margaret impatient on her noble steed, my charming Madame Bernos galloping on my Yorkshire. We will change boots and horses, and covered in dust, exhausted from fatigue, consumed by love, pale and intriguing, we will follow our ladies through hills and valleys. If such zeal is not rewarded, we might as well hang all women as an example. Come on, are you ready?" Full of gratitude, Lionel threw himself into Henry's arms. Within an hour the latter returned. "Let's go," he said. "Everything is settled. We have postponed the departure to Luchon until the 16th, but it wasn't without difficulty. Miss Ellis had suspicions. She knows that my cousin is in Saint-Sauveur and harbors a terrible aversion toward her, knowing the foolish things you did for her in the past. But I skillfully diverted her suspicions. I told her you were terribly ill and that I had just forced you to stay in bed. Heavens! Another reckless move to ruin me. No, not at all. Dick will put a nightcap on your pillow, lay it out on your bed, and order 3 pints of tisane from the housemaid. Above all, he will take the key to this room and keep it in his pocket, settling himself in front of the door with a long face and wide eyes. Besides, he has strict orders not to let anyone in and to strike anyone who tries to force their way in, even if it is Miss Margaret. Look, there he is already warming up your bed. Excellent. He wants to look distressed, but he just looks like a fool. We'll leave through the door that leads to the ravine. Jack will take our horses to the end of the valley as if he were going for a ride, and we will meet him at the Lonio Bridge. Come on, let's go, and may the God of love protect us." They quickly covered the distance between the two mountain ranges and only slowed down in the dark, narrow gorge that stretches from Pierrefitte to Luz. It is undoubtedly one of the most austere and distinctive parts of the Pyrenees. Everything there takes on an imposing appearance. The mountains narrow. The Gave River is confined and roars dully as it passes under arches of rock and wild vines. The dark slopes of the mountains are covered with climbing plants, whose deep green turns blue in the distant plains and grayish towards the peaks. The water of the torrent sometimes reflects a crystalline green, and, at other times, an opaque blue like that of the sea. Large single-arched marble bridges span from one side of the mountain to the other, crossing over the precipices. Nothing is as majestic as the structure and position of these bridges, suspended in the white, misty air that seems to lazily descend into the ravine. The road crosses from one side of the gorge to the other 7 times in a stretch of 4 leagues. When our 2 travelers crossed the 7th bridge, they saw at the bottom of the gorge, gradually opening before them, the charming valley of Luz, bathed in the rays of the rising sun. The height of the mountains bordering the road still did not allow the first morning rays to reach them. The water ouzel sang its soft, melancholic song among the grasses of the torrent. The foamy, cold water struggled to lift the veils of mist that spread over it. Higher up, only a few streaks of light gilded the crevices of the rocks and the hanging vines. But at the bottom of this severe landscape, behind these great dark, rough masses, harsh and rugged like the settings beloved by Salvator, the beautiful valley covered in brilliant dew floated in light and formed a golden sheet framed by black marble. "What beauty!" exclaimed Henry. "And how I pity you, Lionel, for being in love. You are indifferent to all these wonders. You think that the most beautiful ray of sunshine is not worth a smile from Miss Margaret Ellis. Admit it, Henry. Margaret is the most beautiful woman in the 3 kingdoms. Yes, in theory, she is a perfect beauty, but that is precisely what I hold against her. I would prefer her less perfect, less majestic, less classical. I would 1,000 times rather have my cousin if God gave me a choice between the 2. "Come now, Henry, you can't be serious," said Lionel, smiling. "Family pride blinds you. By the consensus of all who have 2 eyes in their heads, Lady Lavinia's beauty is, at the very least, questionable. And I, who knew her in the full freshness of her best years, can assure you that there has never been any possibility of comparison." "Agreed. But how much grace and charm Lavinia has! Such lively eyes, such beautiful hair, such small feet." Lionel amused himself for a while by countering Henry's admiration for his cousin, but while he found pleasure in praising the beauty he loved, a secret feeling of vanity made him enjoy even more the defense of the one he had once loved. Deep down, it was merely a moment of vanity, nothing more, for poor Lavinia had never truly reigned in that heart, which had been spoiled by success from an early age. Perhaps it is a great misfortune for a man to find himself in a brilliant position too soon. The blind favoritism of women, the petty jealousy of common rivals, these are enough to distort the judgment of a novice and corrupt an inexperienced spirit. Lionel, having known too well the pleasure of being loved, had exhausted the strength of his soul in the process. Having experienced passion too soon, he had become incapable of ever feeling a deep one. Beneath his masculine and handsome features, beneath the expression of a youthful and strong countenance, he concealed a heart as cold and worn as that of an old man. "Come on, Lionel. Tell me why you didn't marry Lavinia Buenafé, now Lady Blake, thanks to you." Because in the end, without being a moralist, though I am quite willing to respect, among the privileges of our sex the sublime right to pleasure, I cannot, upon reflection, entirely approve of your conduct. After courting her for 2 years, after compromising her as much as a young miss can be compromised, which is not at all easy in blessed Albion, after making her reject the best suitors, you left her to chase after an Italian singer who certainly did not deserve to inspire such betrayal. Come now, was Lavinia not intelligent and beautiful? Was she not the daughter of a Portuguese banker? Jewish, it is true, but rich? Was she not a good match? Did she not love you madly? Ah, my friend, that is precisely my complaint. She loved me too much for me to make her my wife. According to the opinion of any sensible man, a lawful wife must be a sweet and quiet companion, English, to the depths of her soul, little inclined to love, incapable of jealousy, fond of sleep, and enthusiastic about consuming large amounts of black tea, just enough to keep her faculties balanced in marriage. With this Portuguese woman of passionate heart and active temperament, accustomed from an early age to travel, to free customs, to liberal ideas, to all the dangerous thoughts a woman gathers while exploring the world, I would have been the most miserable of husbands, if not the most ridiculous. For 15 months I deceived myself about the inevitable misfortune this love was preparing for me. I was so young then. I was 22 years old. Remember that, Henry. And do not condemn me. Finally, I opened my eyes at the very moment I was about to commit the immense folly of marrying a woman who was madly in love with me. I stopped at the edge of the precipice and fled to avoid succumbing to my weakness. Hypocrite, said Henry. Lavinia told me this story in a very different way. It seems that long before the cruel decision that led you to leave for Italy with Rosmunda, you were already tired of the poor Jewess and made her cruelly feel the boredom she inspired in you. Oh, when Lavinia tells this, I assure you she does not do so with vanity. She confesses her misfortune and your cruelties with a naive modesty that I have never seen in other women. She has a very particular way of saying, in the end, I bored him. Look, Lionel, if you had heard her utter those words, with the expression of innocent sadness she knows how to convey, you would feel remorse, I am sure. And haven't I? Exclaimed Lionel. That is what is so unbearable about a woman, everything we suffer because of her after we have left her. It is those thousand vexations her memory pursues us with. It is the voice of the bourgeois world crying out for vengeance and anathema. It is the conscience that becomes troubled and fearful. It is those slight reproaches, as sweet as they are cruel, that the poor abandoned one directs at us through the 100 voices of fame. Look, Henry, I know nothing more tedious and disheartening than the role of a man fortunate in love. You're telling me, replied Henry bravely, making that gesture of ironic vanity that suited him so well. But his companion did not deign to smile and continued advancing slowly, letting the reins fall loose over his horse's neck as he cast his weary gaze over the delightful landscapes the valley displayed at his feet. Luce is a small town about a mile from Saint-Sauveur. Our dandies stopped there. Nothing could persuade Lionel to continue to Lady Lavinia's residence. He settled in an inn and collapsed onto the bed, waiting for the appointed hour of the meeting. Although the climate in this valley is infinitely less warm than in Bigorre, the day was heavy and stifling. Sir Lionel, lying on an uncomfortable inn bed, experienced some feverish episodes and fell asleep with difficulty to the hum of insects spinning above his head in the scorching air. His companion, more active and carefree, crossed the valley, visited all the neighbors, observed the horseback riders on the Gavarnie road, greeted the lovely ladies he spotted at their windows or along the paths, cast bright glances at the young Frenchwomen, whom he decidedly preferred, and finally returned to Lionel at nightfall. "Come on, up, up," he exclaimed, stepping under the linen curtains. "The time has come for the meeting." "Already?" said Lionel, who, thanks to the coolness of the night, had just begun to sleep peacefully. "What time is it, Henry?" Henry responded emphatically. "At the close of the day, when the hamlet is still, and naught but the torrent is heard upon the hill." "Oh, for God's sake, enough with your quotes, Henry. I can see that night is falling, that silence is taking over, that the voice of the torrent sounds louder and purer, but Lady Lavinia does not expect me until 9. Perhaps I can sleep a little longer. No, not a minute more, Lionel. We have to walk to Saint-Sauveur. I sent our horses this morning, and the poor animals are already quite exhausted, not to mention what they still have left to do. Come on, get dressed. That's it. At 10, I'll be on horseback at Lady Lavinia's door, holding your steed and ready to offer you the reins, just like our great William at the theater doors when he was reduced to the role of a stable boy. The great man. Come, Lionel, here is your garment bag. A white tie, wax for your mustache. Patience. Oh, what negligence! What apathy! What are you thinking, my dear? To present yourself poorly dressed before a woman you no longer love is a colossal mistake. You must know that, on the contrary, you must appear with all your virtues so that she feels the value of what she is losing. Come on, come on. Tie your hair better than if you were about to open the dance with Miss Margaret. Good. Let me smooth your jacket. What? You forgot a bottle of tuberose essence to soak your Indian handkerchief? That would be unforgivable. No, thank God, here it is. Come on, Lionel. You're perfumed. You shine. Forward. Think that your honor is at stake tonight, in ensuring that some tears fall when you appear for the last time on Lady Lavinia's horizon. As they passed through the village of Saint-Sauveur, which has no more than 50 houses, they were surprised not to see a single elegant person in the street or at the windows. But they understood this peculiarity when they passed by the ground-floor windows, from which came the discordant sounds of a violin, a flute, and a psaltery, a local instrument combining the French drum and the Spanish guitar. The noise and dust revealed to our travelers that the ball had begun, and that the most distinguished aristocracy of France, Spain, and England gathered in a modest hall with white walls decorated with garlands of boxwood and thyme, was dancing to the most detestable charivari ever to tear at ears or mark a rhythm so poorly. Several groups of bathers, whose less brilliant social position or more fragile health deprived them of the pleasure of actively participating in the evening, crowded around the windows, craning their necks over others' shoulders to cast envious or ironic glances at the ball and exchange either flattering or biting remarks, while waiting for the village clock to strike the hour when every convalescent must retire to rest, lest they lose the benefits of the mineral waters. At the moment our two travelers passed by this group, the small crowd moved toward the windows, and Henry, attempting to mingle among the curious, caught these words: "It is the beautiful Jewess Lavinia Blake, who is about to dance. They say she is the best dancer in all of Europe." "Oh, come, Lionel," exclaimed the young baronet. "Come see how well-dressed and charming my cousin looks." But Lionel took him by the arm and, full of bad humor and impatience, pulled him away from the window without deigning to glance in that direction. Come on," he said. "We did not come here to watch dancing." However, he could not walk away quickly enough to avoid another random comment from reaching his ears. "Ah," they said, "it is the handsome Count de Morangy who is dancing with her." "Be so kind as to tell me who else it could be," responded another voice. "They say he is completely mad about her," added a third interlocutor. "He has already killed 3 horses for her sake, and I don't know how many stable boys." Self-love is such a strange advisor that, thanks to it, we often fall into contradictions with ourselves. In fact, Sir Lionel was delighted to know that Lady Lavinia, thanks to new interests, found herself in a situation that ensured their mutual independence. And yet, the public acknowledgement of the triumphs that could make that abandoned woman forget the past was, for Lionel, a kind of affront that he endured with difficulty. Henry, who knew the place, led him to the edge of the village, to the house where his cousin resided. There he left him. The house was somewhat isolated from the rest. On one side, it leaned against the mountain, and on the other, it overlooked the ravine. A few steps away, a torrent roared as it crashed through the cracks in the rock. The house, immersed in that fresh and wild noise, seemed to tremble with the waterfall, as if ready to plunge into the abyss along with it. It was one of the most picturesque landscapes one could choose, and Lionel recognized in that choice the romantic and somewhat extravagant character of Lady Lavinia. An elderly black woman opened the door to a small sitting room on the ground floor. As soon as the light illuminated her bright, weathered face, Lionel let out a gasp of surprise. It was Peppa, Lavinia's old nurse, whom Lionel had seen by his beloved's side for 2 years. Since he was unprepared for any kind of emotion, the unexpected sight of that woman, evoking memories of the past, unsettled all his thoughts for a moment. He was almost on the verge of embracing her, of calling her nurse as he had in the days of his youth and happiness, of kissing her as one would a faithful servant, an old friend. But Peppa took 3 steps back, staring at Lionel's hasty demeanor with astonishment. She did not recognize him. "Am I so changed?" he thought. "I am," he said in a trembling voice. "The person Lady Lavinia has summoned. Has she not informed you?" "Yes, yes, my lord," replied the old woman. "Milady is at the ball. She asked me to bring her fan as soon as a gentleman called at this door. Please wait here. I will go inform her." The old woman began searching for the fan. It was on a marble table within Sir Lionel's reach. He picked it up to hand it to the nurse, and his fingers retained its scent even after she had left. That scent acted on him like a spell. His nerves received a shock that penetrated to his heart and made him tremble. It was Lavinia's favorite perfume, a kind of aromatic herb that grows in India, which she used to infuse her clothes and furniture. That patchouli fragrance evoked a world of memories, a lifetime of love. It was an emanation of the first woman Lionel had ever loved. His vision blurred, his arteries pounded violently. It seemed to him as if a veil floated before him, and in that veil he saw a 16-year-old girl, dark-haired, slender, lively, and sweet at the same time, the Jewish Lavinia, his first love. He saw her pass by, swift as a deer, brushing against the heather, crossing the plains of his park, urging her black horse through the marshes, joyful, passionate, and capricious like Diana Vernon, or like the happy fairies of Green Ireland. Soon, he felt ashamed of his weakness, recalling the tedium that had withered that love and all the others. He cast a sadly philosophical gaze upon the 10 years of practical reason that separated him from those days of poetry and romance. Then he invoked the future, parliamentary glory, and the splendor of political life in the form of Miss Margaret Ellis, whom he also invoked in the form of her dowry. Finally, he began to pace the room, casting around him the skeptical gaze of a disillusioned lover and a 30-year-old man confronting social life. In the Pyrenees, accommodations are simple, but thanks to the avalanches and torrents that devastate homes every winter, each spring renews or rejuvenates the decorations and furnishings. The small house Lavinia had rented was built of rough marble and entirely paneled with resinous wood inside. This wood, painted white, had the shine and freshness of stucco. A reed mat woven in Spain and patterned with various colors served as a carpet. White fabric curtains cast the shifting shadows of the pine trees, whose dark tresses swayed in the night wind under the damp gaze of the moon. Small polished olive wood boxes were filled with the most beautiful flowers of the mountain. Lavinia had gathered them herself from the most remote valleys and the highest peaks. Those crimson-centered belladonnas, those blue-plumed and poisonous calyxed aconites, those white and pink campions with delicately scalloped petals, those pale soapworts, those translucent and pleated bellflowers like muslin, those purple valerian, all those wild daughters of solitude, so fragrant and fresh that the deer feared to wilt them with a mere touch in its flight, and the waters of the springs unknown to hunters barely grazed them with their slow and silent flow. This small, white, and fragrant room had indeed, and almost inadvertently, the air of a lover's rendezvous, but it also seemed like a sanctuary of pure and virginal love. The candles emitted a timid glow. The flowers seemed to modestly close their petals to the light. No feminine garment, no trace of coquetry had been left forgotten on the furniture. Only a withered bouquet of pansies and a torn white glove lay together on the mantelpiece. Lionel, moved by an irresistible impulse, picked up the glove and pressed it in his hands. It felt like the cold, convulsive grip of a final farewell. He took the scentless bouquet, gazed at it for a moment, made a bitter remark about the flowers it contained, and threw it far from him. Had Lavinia left that bouquet with the intention of having it commented on by her former lover? Lionel approached the window and drew back the curtains to distract himself, through the spectacle of nature, from the emotions that increasingly dominated him. This spectacle was magical. The house, perched on the rock, served as a bastion of a gigantic wall of steep cliffs that the torrent struck at its base. To the right, the waterfall fell with a furious roar. To the left, a group of fir trees leaned over the abyss. In the distance, the valley stretched out, uncertain and whitened by the moon. A large wild laurel growing in a crevice of the rock extended its long gleaming leaves to the edge of the window, and the breeze, stirring them against each other, seemed to whisper mysterious words. Lavinia entered while Lionel was absorbed in this contemplation. The noise of the torrent and the wind prevented him from hearing her. She remained standing behind him for several minutes, undoubtedly gathering her thoughts, perhaps wondering if this was truly the man she had loved so much. For in that moment of inevitable emotion and foreseeable circumstance, Lavinia still felt as though she were dreaming. She remembered a time when the mere thought of seeing Sir Lionel again would have seemed impossible without dying of rage and sorrow. And now she was there, calm, serene, perhaps indifferent. Lionel turned mechanically and saw her. He had not expected it, and a cry escaped him. Then, ashamed of such an indiscretion, confused by what he felt, he made a violent effort to offer Lady Lavinia a proper and impeccable greeting. But despite himself, an unexpected agitation, an invincible turmoil, paralyzed his usually witty and frivolous spirit, that spirit so docile, so accommodating, always ready, according to the laws of courtesy, to dive headfirst into conversation and circulate, like gold, from hand to hand for the use of whoever came first. This time, that rebellious spirit remained silent, absorbed in contemplating Lady Lavinia. He had not expected to see her so beautiful again. He had left her worn and diminished. At that time, tears had withered her cheeks, sorrow had thinned her figure, her gaze was dull, her hands dry, and she dressed carelessly. Poor Lavinia had neglected herself imprudently, without realizing that grief only beautifies a woman's heart, and that most men would be willing to deny the existence of a soul in women, just as it had been asserted in a certain council of Italian prelates. Now, Lavinia shone with that second charm that returns to women when their hearts have not suffered irreparable wounds in their first youth. She was still a petite and pale Portuguese woman, with a slightly bronzed complexion, a somewhat severe profile, but her gaze and her manners had acquired all the warmth and caressing grace of the French. Her dark skin had taken on a velvety softness from the effect of calm and strengthened health. Her delicate figure had regained the flexibility and blossoming vigor of youth. Her hair, which she had once cut as a sacrifice to love, now flowed in all its splendor in thick braids over her smooth and uniform forehead. Her attire consisted of an Indian muslin dress and a small bouquet of white heather gathered from the ravine and woven into her hair. There is no plant more graceful than white heather. Seeing it sway its delicate spikes over Lavinia's black hair, it seemed like a cluster of living pearls. An exquisite taste presided over this hairstyle and that simple dress, where the ingenious coquetry of a woman revealed itself precisely by concealing itself. Never had Lionel seen Lavinia so captivating. For a moment he was on the verge of kneeling and asking for forgiveness, but the serene smile he saw on her face restored just enough bitterness to endure the encounter with all the appearances of dignity. Lacking a suitable phrase, he took from his chest a carefully sealed package and placing it on the table said in a firm voice, "Madam, as you see, I have obeyed like a slave. May I believe that from this day forth my freedom will be returned to me." "It seems to me," Lavinia replied with an expression of melancholic joy, "that until now your freedom has not been too constrained, Sir Lionel. Truly, have you remained all this time under my yoke? I must confess that I had not indulged in such a notion. Oh, madam, for the love of God, let us not speak in irony. Is this not a sad moment?" "It is an old tradition," she replied, "a predictable outcome, an inevitable situation in all love stories. And if, when we wrote to each other, we had been aware of the future necessity of tearing our letters away from each other in distrust. But one does not think of that. At 20, one writes with the deep certainty of having exchanged eternal vows. One smiles with compassion at the thought of those commonplace outcomes of all passions that fade away. One takes pride in believing that among all, one will be the exception to this great law of human fragility. Noble error, happy illusion from which the greatness and fantasies of youth are born. Isn't that so, Lionel?" Lionel remained silent and astonished. That sadly philosophical language, though quite natural on Lavinia's lips, seemed to him a monstrous absurdity, for he had never seen her like this. He had known her as a fragile girl, blindly surrendering to all the errors of life, trusting every storm of passion. And when he left her broken with sorrow, he had still heard her protest an eternal fidelity to the author of her misfortune. But seeing her now pronounce the death sentence on all the illusions of the past was both painful and terrifying. This woman who had survived herself, who did not fear to deliver the funeral eulogy of her own life, was a profoundly sorrowful spectacle that Lionel could not witness without suffering. He found nothing to say. He knew better than anyone all that could be said in such a situation, but he lacked the courage to help Lavinia consummate her emotional suicide. While he held the packet of letters in his hands in confusion, Lavinia said, "You know me well enough, or should I say you still remember me well enough, to be sure that I do not claim these tokens of a former affection for any of those prudent reasons that women invoke when they no longer love. If you had such a suspicion, it should be enough to recall that for 10 years these tokens have been in your possession without my ever thinking of reclaiming them. I would never have done so if another woman's peace were not compromised by the existence of these documents." Lionel stared at Lavinia, watching for the slightest sign of bitterness or sorrow that the mention of Margaret Ellis might evoke in her. But he found not the slightest alteration in her gaze or her voice. Lavinia now seemed invulnerable. Has this woman turned to diamond or ice? Lionel wondered. You are generous, he said with a mix of gratitude and irony. If that is your only reason, what other could I have, Sir Lionel? Would you care to tell me? I might suppose, madam, if I intended to deny your generosity, God forbid, that personal motives drive you to wish for the return of these letters and that portrait. That would be a little late, Lavinia replied with a laugh. Surely, if I were to tell you that I have waited until today to have personal motives, as you put it, you would be struck with great remorse, would you not? Madam, you bewilder me, said Lionel, and he spoke these words with ease, for he was once again on familiar ground. He had expected reproaches and was prepared for an attack, but he gained no such advantage. The enemy changed position immediately. Come now, my dear Lionel, she said, smiling with a kindness in her gaze that he had never known before, having only seen the passionate woman in her. Do not fear that I will take advantage of the occasion. With age, reason has come to me, and long ago I understood that you were not guilty toward me. The guilty one was I, toward myself, toward society, perhaps even toward you. For between two lovers as young as we were, the woman should be the man's guide. Instead of leading him toward a false and impossible destiny, she should hold him to the world, drawing him toward her. I did not know how to do anything in time. I placed countless obstacles in your life. I was the unwitting yet reckless cause of the long cries of reproach that pursued you. I suffered the terrible pain of seeing your life threatened by avengers whom I renounced, yet who rose against you despite me. I was the torment of your youth and the curse of your maturity. Forgive me. I have more than atoned for the wrong I did you. Lionel was overwhelmed with surprise. He had come there like an accused man reluctantly taking his seat in the dock, and he was being treated like a judge whose mercy was humbly implored. Lionel had been born with a noble heart. It was the breath of the world's vanities that had withered it in its bloom. Lady Lavinia's generosity awakened in him an emotion all the more profound because he was utterly unprepared for it. Overcome by the grandeur of the character revealed before him, he bowed his head and bent his knee. I never understood you, madam, he said with a moved voice. I did not know your worth. I was unworthy of you, and I am ashamed of it. Do not say that, Lionel, she replied, extending her hand to help him rise. When you knew me, I was not what I am today. If the past could be changed, if now I were to receive the homage of a man in your position in the world— Hypocrite, Lionel thought. She is adored by the Count of Morangi, the most elegant of noblemen. If I had to decide upon the external and public life of a loved man, she continued with modesty, perhaps I would know how to add to his happiness instead of seeking to destroy it. Is this an advance? Lionel wondered, dazed, and in his confusion he fervently pressed Lavinia's hand to his lips. At the same time, he observed that hand, remarkably white and delicate. In the early youth of women, their hands are often red and swollen. Later they pale, lengthen, and acquire more elegant proportions. The more he looked at her and listened to her, the more astonished he was to discover new perfections in her. Among other things, she now spoke English with extreme purity. She had retained just enough of her foreign accent and incorrect expressions, those Lionel used to mock mercilessly, to give her speech and pronunciation an elegant and charming originality. What had been haughty and somewhat wild in her character might have been concentrated in the depths of her soul, but her exterior no longer revealed it. Less striking, less flamboyant, perhaps less poetic than before, she was now much more seductive in Lionel's eyes. She fit better with his ideas and with the world. What can I tell you? After an hour of conversation, Lionel had forgotten the 10 years that separated him from Lavinia. Or rather, he had forgotten his entire life. He believed himself beside a new woman whom he loved for the first time. The past reminded him of a sad, jealous, demanding Lavinia. It showed him above all as guilty in his own eyes. And since Lavinia understood how painful those memories could be for him, she had the delicacy to mention them only with caution. They told each other about the lives they had led since their separation. Lavinia questioned Lionel about his new loves with the impartiality of a sister. She praised Miss Ellis's beauty and showed a benevolent and curious interest in her character and the advantages that a marriage with her would bring to her former friend. For her part, Lavinia recounted, haltingly, but with wit and delicacy, her travels, her friendships, her marriage to an old lord, her widowhood, and how she now used her fortune and freedom. In everything she said, there was a slight touch of irony. While paying homage to the power of reason, there was a hint of secret bitterness toward that imposing force, which revealed itself through jokes. But mercy and indulgence dominated that soul, devastated from an early age, giving her a certain greatness that elevated her above all others. More than an hour had passed. Lionel did not count the minutes. He surrendered to these new impressions with that sudden and fleeting passion that is the last faculty of worn-out hearts. He tried, through all sorts of insinuations, to encourage the conversation so that Lavinia would speak about her current emotional state, but his efforts were in vain. She was more agile and elusive than he was. Just when he thought he had touched a string of her soul, he was left with nothing but a thread in his hand. Just when he hoped to capture her essence and hold it still to analyze it, the specter vanished like a breath, escaping, as intangible as air. Suddenly, there was a loud knock at the door. The noise of the torrent had prevented them from hearing the first knocks, but now they were repeated impatiently. Lady Lavinia started. "It's Henry, coming to warn me," said Sir Lionel. "But if you would grant me a few more moments, I will tell him to wait." "Will I obtain this favor, madam?" Lionel was about to insist stubbornly when Peppa rushed in. "The Count of Morangy insists on entering," she said in Portuguese to her mistress. "He's outside. He won't listen to reason." "Oh, dear God!" Lavinia exclaimed naively in English. "He's so jealous. What am I to do with you, Lionel?" Lionel stood as if struck by lightning. "Let him in," Lavinia quickly told the maid. Then turning to Sir Lionel, she said, "You, step out onto this balcony. The weather is magnificent. You can wait there for 5 minutes as a favor to me." She firmly pushed him toward the balcony, then let the heavy curtains fall. Turning to the Count as he entered, she said smoothly, "What is the meaning of this commotion? This is a true invasion." "Oh, forgive me, madam," exclaimed the Count of Morangy. "I implore your forgiveness on my knees. Seeing you leave the ball so abruptly with Peppa, I thought you were ill. You have been indisposed these past few days. I was so worried. For God's sake, forgive me, Lavinia. I am a fool, a madman. But I love you so much that I no longer know what I'm doing." As the Count spoke, Lionel, barely recovered from his shock, gave himself over to a violent fit of anger. "Impertinent woman," he thought. "She dares to ask me to witness a rendezvous with her lover. Ah, if this is a premeditated revenge, if this is a deliberate insult, she had better beware of me. But what foolishness! If I show anger, I would be giving her the victory. Let's see. Let's attend this scene of love with the cold detachment of a true philosopher." He leaned against the windowsill and dared to widen, with the tip of his cane, the slit left by the curtains as they met. Thus he could see and hear. The Count of Morangy was one of the most handsome men in France, blond, tall, with a face more imposing than expressive, perfectly groomed, a dandy from head to toe. His voice was soft and velvety. He dragged his words slightly when speaking. He had large but dull eyes, a thin and mocking mouth, hands as white as a woman's, and impeccable footwear. To Sir Lionel's eyes, he was the most formidable rival he could face, a worthy adversary from head to toe. The Count spoke in French, and Lavinia responded in that language, which she mastered as well as English. Another new talent of Lavinia. She listened to the handsome gentleman's insipid words with singular complacency. The Count ventured 2 or 3 passionate phrases, which to Lionel seemed to stray a little from the rules of good taste and dramatic propriety. Lavinia did not take offense. There was barely a hint of irony in her smiles. She insisted that the Count return to the ball before she did, saying it would not be appropriate for them to enter together. However, he stubbornly insisted on accompanying her to the door, swearing he would not enter for another 15 minutes. As he spoke, he took Lady Blake's hands, and she abandoned them to him with a lazy, exasperating indifference. The patience of Sir Lionel was wearing thin. "I am a complete fool," he finally said to himself, "for staying here enduring this farce when I could leave." He walked to the end of the balcony, but the balcony was closed, and below stretched a ledge of rocks that bore no resemblance to a path. Nevertheless, Lionel dared to jump over the railing and take a few steps onto the ledge. But soon he was forced to stop. The ledge ended abruptly at the waterfall, and even a deer would have hesitated to take another step. The moon, rising in the sky, revealed at that moment the depth of the abyss, from which only a few centimeters of rock separated him. He had to close his eyes to resist the vertigo that overtook him and struggled to return to the balcony. When he finally managed to cross the railing again and saw that fragile parapet between him and the precipice, he felt like the luckiest man alive, even if he had to pay for his refuge with the triumph of his rival. He had no choice but to resign himself to listening to the passionate declarations of the Count of Morangy. "Madam," the Count was saying, "I can no longer pretend with you. It is impossible that you do not know how much I love you, and it seems cruel to me that you treat me as if this were one of those whims that are born and die in a single day. The love I feel for you is a lifelong sentiment, and if you do not accept my wish to devote my life to you, you shall see, madam, how a man of the world can lose all respect for convention and free himself from the dominion of cold reason. Oh, do not reduce me to despair or fear its consequences." "Do you want me to speak plainly?" Lavinia replied. "Very well, I will. Do you know my story, sir?" "Yes, madam, I know everything. I know that a wretch, whom I consider the most despicable of men, deceived and shamefully abandoned you. The compassion your misfortune inspires in me only increases my devotion. Only great souls are destined to be victims of men and of public opinion." "Well then, sir," replied Lavinia, "know that I have learned from the harsh lessons of my fate. Know that today I am wary of my own heart and of others. I know that it is not always within a man's power to keep his oaths, and that he abuses his position as soon as he obtains what he desires. That said, sir, do not expect to break my resolve. If you speak seriously, here is my answer. I am invulnerable. This woman, so criticized for the errors of her youth, is now surrounded by a bulwark stronger than virtue, distrust." "Ah, you do not understand me, madam," exclaimed the Count, kneeling. "May I be damned if I ever thought to take advantage of your misfortunes, to expect sacrifices that your dignity would condemn." "Are you truly sure indeed that you have never thought of it?" asked Lavinia with a sad smile. "Well, I will be frank," said the Count of Morangy. in a tone of sincerity that completely erased his air of nobility. Perhaps I thought so before I met you, an idea I now reject with remorse. Before you, lies are impossible, Lavinia. You subjugate the will. You would annihilate any deceit. You inspire reverence. Oh, since I have known who you truly are, I swear that my adoration has been worthy of you. Listen to me, madam, and let me remain at your feet awaiting the verdict of my life. With unbreakable vows, I wish to dedicate my entire future to you. It is an honorable name I dare to believe, and a brilliant fortune of which I am not vain, as you well know, that I lay at your feet along with a soul that adores you and a heart that beats only for you. Is it then truly a marriage proposal you are making me? Said Lady Lavinia, without showing the Count an offensive surprise. Very well, sir, I thank you for this token of esteem and affection. And she extended her hand to him warmly. My God, she accepts, exclaimed the Count, covering that hand with kisses. No, sir, said Lavinia. I ask you for time to reflect. Ah, but may I hope? I do not know, but you can count on my gratitude. Farewell. Return to the ball, I insist. I will be there in a moment. The Count passionately kissed the edge of her shawl and left. As soon as he closed the door, Lionel completely drew back the curtain, ready to receive Lady Blake's permission to enter. But she was sitting on the sofa, her back to the window. Lionel saw her face reflected in the mirror before them. Her eyes were fixed on the ground. Her expression was somber and pensive. Immersed in deep thought, she seemed to have completely forgotten Lionel, and the exclamation of surprise that escaped her when he leaped into the center of the room was an innocent confession of her cruel distraction. He was pale with displeasure, but he controlled himself. Admit, he said to her, that I have respected your new affections, madam. It has cost me great self-denial to listen to insults that may have been intentional, and remain impassive in my hiding place. Intentional? Repeated Lavinia, looking at him severely. What do you dare think of me, sir? If that is your opinion, leave. No, no, that is not my opinion, said Lionel, approaching her and taking her arm agitatedly. Do not heed what I say. I am very disturbed, but you have also placed too much trust in my reason by making me witness such a scene. In your reason, Lionel? I do not understand that word. Do you mean that I have trusted in your indifference? Mock me as much as you want. Be cruel. Trample on me. You have the right to do so, but I am very unhappy. He was visibly moved. Lavinia believed, or pretended to believe, that he was acting. Let us put an end to this, she said, rising. You should have taken a lesson from what you heard me say to the Count of Morangi, and yet that man's love does not offend me. Farewell, Lionel. Let us say goodbye forever, but let us do so without bitterness. Here is your portrait and your letters. Come now, release my hand. I must return to the ball. You must return to dance with the Count of Morangi, is that it? Said Lionel, throwing down her portrait in anger and trampling on it. Listen to me, said Lavinia, a little pale but calm. The Count of Morangi offers me rank and a high rehabilitation in society. The alliance with an old lord never completely erased the cruel stain that weighs on an abandoned woman. It is known that an old man always receives more than he gives. But a young man, rich, noble, envied, loved by women, it is different. It is worth considering, Lionel, and I am glad to have treated the Count with delicacy until now. For some time I had sensed the sincerity of his intentions. Oh, women! Vanity never dies in you, exclaimed Lionel with disdain as she left. He went to meet Henry at the inn. Henry was waiting for him impatiently. Damn you, Lionel, exclaimed Henry. I've been waiting for you for over an hour with my stirrups on. What? 2 hours for such a meeting? Come on, let's go. You will tell me on the way. Good night, Henry. Go and tell Miss Margaret that the pillow occupying my place in the bed is very ill. I am staying." "Heavens and earth! What am I hearing?" exclaimed Henry. "You don't want to go to Luchon? I will go another time. For now I am staying here." "But that is impossible. You must be dreaming. Have you reconciled with Lady Blake?" "No, not that I know of. Far from it. But I am tired, melancholy, and in pain. I am staying." Henry was astonished. He exhausted all his eloquence to convince Lionel to leave, but failing to do so, he got off his horse and, throwing the reins to the stable boy, exclaimed, "Well, if that's the case, I am staying too. It seems so amusing that I want to witness it to the end. To hell with the loves of Bagnères and the travel plans. My worthy friend Sir Lionel Bridgemont is offering me a play. I will be the devoted and expectant spectator of his drama." Lionel would have given anything in the world to rid himself of that giddy and mocking observer, but it was impossible. "Since you are determined to follow me," he told him, "I warn you that I am going to the ball." "To the ball? Very well. Dancing is an excellent remedy for melancholy and muscle aches." Lavinia was dancing with the Count of Morangi. Lionel had never seen her dance. When she arrived in England, she only knew the bolero and had never allowed herself to dance it under the severe British sky. Since then, she had learned our country dances, to which she added the voluptuous grace of the Spanish, mixed with a certain prudence of the English that tempered her fervor. People climbed onto benches to watch her dance. The Count of Morangi was triumphant. Lionel got lost in the crowd. How much vanity there is in the human heart! Lionel suffered bitterly upon seeing the one who had been for so long subjected and imprisoned in his love, the one whom the world would not have dared to claim from his arms, now free and proud, surrounded by tributes, finding in every gaze either vengeance or reparation for the past. When she returned to her place, at the moment the Count was distracted, Lionel skillfully slipped beside her and picked up her fan, which she had just dropped. Lavinia did not expect to find him there. A faint cry escaped her, and her face visibly paled. "Ah, my God," she said, "I thought you were on your way to Bagnères." "Fear nothing, madam," he replied in a low voice. "I will not compromise you before the Count of Morangi." However, he could not restrain himself for long and soon returned to invite her to dance. She accepted. "Must I also ask the Count of Morangi for permission?" he asked her. The dance lasted until dawn. Lady Lavinia had the gift of prolonging a ball as long as she remained there. Under the cover of the disorder that gradually seeps into a party as the night progresses, Lionel was able to speak to her frequently. That night completely clouded his mind. Intoxicated by Lady Blake's charms, excited by his rivalry with the Count, irritated by the tributes of the crowd that constantly interposed between her and him, he devoted himself with all his might to rekindling that extinguished passion, and his wounded pride stung so deeply that he left the ball in an inconceivable state of delirium. He tried in vain to sleep. Henry, who had courted all the women and danced all the country dances, was snoring loudly. As soon as he woke up, "Well, Lionel," he said, rubbing his eyes, "by God, my friend, your reconciliation with my cousin is a fascinating story. For do not expect to deceive me, I already know the secret." When we entered the ball, Lavinia was sad and danced distractedly. As soon as she saw you, her gaze lit up, her brow cleared. She was radiant in the waltz when you carried her like a feather through the crowd. Happy Lionel. In Luchon, a beautiful fiancée and a great dowry. In Saint-Sauveur, a lovely mistress and a great triumph. "Leave me alone with your nonsense," said Lionel in a bad mood. Henry was the first to dress. He went out to see what was happening and soon returned, making his usual noise on the stairs. "By heaven, Henry," his friend told him, "will you never abandon that panting voice and that agitated manner? You always seem to have spotted a hare and take those who listen to you for unleashed hunting dogs." "To horse! To horse!" shouted Henry. "Lady Lavinia Blake is mounted. She is heading to Guidres with 10 wild young women and I don't know how many gentlemen, the Count of Morangi leading. Which does not mean she is only thinking of the Count of Morangi. Let's be clear about that." "Silence, clown," exclaimed Lionel. "To horse, indeed. And let's ride." The cavalcade had a head start. The road to Guidres is a steep path, a sort of staircase carved into the rock, bordering the precipice, offering 1,000 difficulties to the horses and 1,000 very real dangers to the travelers. Lionel spurred his horse into a gallop. Henry thought he was mad, but believing it a matter of honor not to fall behind, he hurried after him. Their arrival was a fantastic incident for the caravan. Lavinia trembled at the sight of those two reckless riders galloping along the edge of a terrifying abyss. When she recognized Lionel and his cousin, she paled and almost fell from her mount. The Count of Morangi noticed it and did not take his eyes off her. He was jealous. That was yet another stimulus for Lionel. Throughout the day he stubbornly contested every glance from Lavinia. The difficulty of speaking to her, the agitation of the journey, the emotions stirred by the sublime landscapes they traversed, the skillful and always kind resistance of Lady Blake, her dexterity in guiding her horse, her courage, her grace, the ever-poetic and ever-natural expression of her sensations, all ended up exalting Sir Lionel. It was a very exhausting day for that poor woman, harassed by two suitors between whom she tried to maintain balance. She also gratefully welcomed her cheerful cousin and his extravagances whenever he placed himself between her and her admirers. At nightfall, the sky was covered with clouds. A serious storm was approaching. The cavalcade quickened its pace, but they were still more than a league away from Saint-Sauveur when the storm broke. The darkness became absolute. The horses were frightened. The Count of Morangi's horse bolted and disappeared into the distance. The small troop scattered, and it took all the efforts of the guides escorting them on foot to prevent a serious accident from tragically ending a day that had begun so joyfully. Lionel, lost in terrible darkness, was forced to walk beside the precipice, holding his horse's reins to avoid falling with him. However, he was dominated by an even greater concern. He had lost Lavinia despite all his efforts and had been searching for her anxiously for a quarter of an hour when a lightning flash illuminated a woman sitting on a rock, slightly above the path. He stopped, strained his ears, and recognized the voice of Lady Blake. But a man was with her. It could only be the Lord of Morangi. Lionel cursed him in silence and, determined at least to disturb his rival's happiness, made his way toward the pair as best he could. How great was his joy when he recognized Henry beside his cousin. With the carefreeness that characterized him, Henry yielded his place and withdrew to tend to the horses. Nothing is as solemn and majestic as the sound of a storm in the mountains. The thunder's rumble, echoing in the abyss, repeats and amplifies in its depths. The wind which lashes the tall pine groves and presses them against the cliff like a cloak over a human body, also sneaks through the gorges and lets out prolonged, sharp wails like sobs. Lavinia, absorbed in contemplating this imposing spectacle, listened to the thousand sounds of the shaken mountain, waiting for another lightning bolt to cast its bluish light over the landscape. Startled, she realized that the flash revealed Sir Lionel sitting beside her, in the place her cousin had occupied moments before. Lionel thought she was frightened by the storm and took her hand to reassure her. Another flash revealed Lavinia, with one elbow resting on her knee. Her chin sunk into her hand, gazing in awe at the immense scene of the unleashed elements. "Oh my God! How wonderful this is!" she exclaimed. "How intense and yet soft is this blue light! Did you see how the edges of the crag gleamed like sapphires, and that livid horizon where the peaks of the glaciers rose like enormous specters in their shrouds? Did you also notice how, in the abrupt transition from darkness to light, and from light to darkness, everything seemed to move, to stir, as if these mountains were swaying to collapse?" "I see nothing here except you, Lavinia," Lionel replied intensely. "I hear no voice but yours. I breathe no air but your breath. I feel no emotion but that of having you near. Do you know that I love you madly? Yes, you know it. You noticed it today, and perhaps you wanted it. Well then, triumph if that is so. I am at your feet. I beg you for forgiveness and for the past to be forgotten, my forehead in the dust. I implore the future. Oh, I ask for it with passion, and you must grant it to me, Lavinia, because I desire you with all my strength, and I have rights over you." "Rights?" she replied, withdrawing her hand. "Is it not a right, a terrible right, the harm I did to you, Lavinia? And if you let me have it to ruin your life, can you take it from me now that I want to repair it and redeem my crimes?" It is well known what a man can say in such a situation. Lionel was more eloquent than I could be in his place. He grew notably passionate, and, despairing of overcoming Lady Blake's resistance in any other way, seeing also that by not equaling his rival's submissions, he was giving him too real an advantage, he rose to the same sacrifice. He offered his name and fortune to Lady Lavinia. "But what are you saying?" she replied with emotion. "Would you renounce Miss Ellis when you're already betrothed to her, when your marriage is decided?" "I will," he replied. "I will do something the world will consider insolent and guilty. Perhaps I will have to atone for it with my blood, but I am willing to do anything to win you, because the greatest crime of my life was not recognizing you, and my first duty is to return to you. Oh, speak, Lavinia. Give me back the happiness I lost when I lost you. Today I know how to value and keep it, because I too have changed. I am no longer that ambitious, restless man tormented by the false promises of an unknown future. Today I understand life. I know how much the world and its false splendor are worth. I know that none of my triumphs has equaled a single flash of your gaze, and that the chimera of happiness I always pursued eluded me until it brought me back to you. O Lavinia, return to me as well. Who will love you as I do? Who will see, as I do, the greatness, the patience, and the mercy of your soul?" Lavinia remained silent, but her heart beat with a violence that Lionel could perceive. Her hand trembled in his, and she did not try to withdraw it, nor a strand of her hair that the wind had loosened and which Lionel covered with kisses. They did not feel the rain that had begun to fall in thick, scattered drops. The wind had died down, the sky was beginning to clear, and the Count of Marangi was approaching them as fast as his barefoot limping horse allowed, the same horse that had nearly killed him when it stumbled against a rock. Lavinia finally saw him, and abruptly separated herself from Lionel's embraces. The latter, furious at this setback, but filled with hope and love, helped her mount her horse again, and accompanied her to her house's door. There, lowering her voice, she said to him, "Lionel, you have made me offers whose value I fully recognize. I cannot answer you without having reflected carefully." "Oh God! It is the same answer you gave to Lord Marangi." "No, no, it is not the same," she replied in a shaken voice. "But your presence here may give rise to many ridiculous rumors. If you truly love me, Lionel, you will swear to obey me. I swear it by God and by you. Then leave immediately and return to Bagnères. I swear to you, in turn, that in 40 hours You shall have my answer. But what will become of me, my God, during this century of waiting? You will wait, Lavinia told him, hurriedly closing the door as if she feared saying too much. Lionel waited, indeed. He had as motives a word from Lavinia and all the arguments of his pride. You made a mistake abandoning the battlefield, Henry told him as they walked. Lavinia was beginning to soften. I assure you, Lionel, I do not recognize you, even if only to prevent Morangi from claiming victory. Come on, you are more in love with Miss Ellis than I thought. Lionel was too preoccupied to listen. He spent the time Lavinia had set for him locked in his room, pretending to be ill and did not deign to disabuse Sir Henry, who never ceased commenting on his conduct. Finally, the letter arrived. Here it is, neither one nor the other. By the time you receive this letter, when Mr. de Morangi, whom I have sent to Tarbes, receives my response, I will be far from both of you. I will have left, gone forever, lost beyond return for you and for him. You offer me a name, a rank, a fortune. You believe that great brilliance in the world is a great seduction for a woman. Oh no, not for one who knows and despises it as I do. But still, do not think, Lionel, that I despise the offer you made me of sacrificing a brilliant marriage and chaining yourself to me forever. You have understood how cruel it is for a woman's pride to be abandoned, how glorious it is to draw an unfaithful man back to her feet, and you wish to compensate me with this triumph for all that I have suffered. For that, I return to you all my esteem, and would forgive the past if it had not already been forgiven long ago. But know, Lionel, that it is not within your power to repair this damage. No, this is beyond the reach of any man. The blow I received is mortal. It has killed in me forever the capacity to love, extinguished the flame of illusions, and life now presents itself to me in its most gray and miserable aspect. Well then, I do not complain about my fate. This was bound to happen sooner or later. We all live to grow old and to see disappointments take hold of each of our joys. I have been disillusioned a little young, it is true, and the need to love has long survived the ability to believe. I have fought for a long time, often, against my youth as against a relentless enemy. I have always managed to overcome it. And do you think that this last struggle against you, this resistance to the promises you make me, is not very cruel and difficult? I can say it now that flight has put me safe from the danger of succumbing. I still love you, I feel it. The imprint of the first loved one never completely disappears. It seems to fade away. One falls asleep in the oblivion of past sufferings. But let the image of the past rise again. Let the former idol reappear, and we are once more ready to kneel before him. Oh, flee, flee, phantom, and lie. You are nothing but a shadow, and if I dared to follow you, you would once again lead me among the reefs to leave me there, broken and dying. Flee. I no longer believe in you. I know you do not hold the future, and that, even if today your words are sincere, the fragility of your heart will force you to lie tomorrow. And why would I accuse you of being like this? Are we not all weak and fickle? Was I not calm and cold when I faced you yesterday? Was I not convinced that I could not love you? Had I not encouraged Mr. de Morangi's advances? And yet, last night, when you sat beside me on that rock, when you spoke to me with such passion in the midst of the wind and storm, did I not feel my soul melting and softening? Oh, remembering it, it was your voice of old. It was your passion of yesteryear. It was you. It was my first love. It was my youth that I found all at once. And now that I am cold again, I feel sad unto death, because I wake up and remember having had a beautiful dream in the midst of a sad life. Goodbye, Lionel. Supposing that your desire to marry me had endured until the moment of realization, and by now, perhaps, You already feel that I am right to reject you. You would have been unhappy under the yoke of such a union. You would have seen how the world, always ungrateful and miserly in praise for our good deeds, regarded yours as merely the fulfillment of a duty and denied you the triumph you expected from it. Then you would have lost the satisfaction of yourself by not obtaining the admiration you counted on. Oh, let us not spoil this moment of fervor and confidence we enjoyed last night. Let us keep its memory, but let us not try to relive it. Do not fear wounded pride on my part concerning the Count of Morangi. I have never loved him. He is one of those thousands of impotent men who failed, with my help, alas, to make my extinguished heart beat. I would not even accept him as a husband. A man of his rank always sells too dearly the protection he grants by making it felt. And besides, I hate marriage. I hate all men. I hate eternal commitments, promises, projects, a future arranged in advance by contracts and pacts that fate always mocks. I now love only travel, reverie, solitude, the noise of the world, to pass through it and laugh at it, and then poetry, to endure the past, and God to hope for the future. Sir Lionel Bridgemont at first experienced great mortification of his pride, for, it must be said, to console the reader who may have been too interested in him during these last 40 hours, he had reflected a great deal. At first, he thought of mounting a horse, pursuing Lady Blake, overcoming her resistance, triumphing over her cold reason. And then he thought that she might very well persist in her refusal, and that, in the meantime, Miss Ellis might take offense at his conduct and reject his alliance. He stayed. "Come," Henry told him the next day, seeing him kiss Miss Margaret's hand, who granted him this token of forgiveness after a rather heated dispute about his absence. "Next year, we shall be in Parliament." The end. Thank you for sharing this moment of reading on Eternal Echoes. If you'd like to share your opinion or express a point of view, feel free to do so in the video comments. And if you've enjoyed this moment and want to hear more stories, I invite you to subscribe to the channel.